Superintendent, thanks for making time for us.
My pleasure.
How did you end up putting your hand up to be a sponsor for the prevention of abuse to older people?
Well, my first command was at Chatswood on the North Shore. It was the first time I've been back in uniform for many years. I was a detective chasing gangsters most of my service, and I went back into the community setting. And one of the jobs I was made aware of very early was a lady had been found in her flat in Lane Cove, which is a very affluent sort of area, on her own, gravely ill, and she'd been lying on the floor of her flat for several days. And some of my constables forced entry into the room to give her some assistance, and she died as they arrived. So it was a terrible, terrible tragedy. And
no one had noticed?
No one noticed. So this was in a multi-level flat. It wasn't a huge block of flats. It was like a normal sort of lower North Shore, two up, two down sort of place. So it wasn't as if it was a massive monolith. In a otherwise very functional area and a place where people looked after each other. But as people age, they lose their families, they become more and more isolated and more open to abuse from others or from being neglected. And this lady obviously suffered from a lack of support for whatever reason. And it's whatever the reasons, it shouldn't happen that way. Someone shouldn't be allowed to lie there and fester on their own floor until they die in the arms of the police when they arrive. So for me personally, I felt that was very confronting because my history, I'm from the country, I'm from Goulburn, and we're part of a big country Catholic family. Grandma had 9 kids, she was one of 10. When she died, there were 54 grandchildren and 76 great-grandchildren, and I was the favourite. And as she aged, she was the centre of our family. She was the matriarch. My grandfather died a little while ago, so everyone was around Grandma, and everyone was always at her place or for Christmas and all that sort of stuff. And as she died, she was surrounded by family all the time, and as she was in hospital the last week, we were there basically living in the hospital with her till she passed. So that was my view of how older people should be treated, and that made sense to me. And the concept that someone could either be neglected through disregard in that lady's situation or active abuse was something I just couldn't accept. So when I had the opportunity to take up this role, I undertook it not knowing much about the field from not having personal experience. So it's also a field I think you become easily quite engaged in because you understand the vulnerability of age, and these people that had strong independent lives are all of a sudden vulnerable because they, through no fault of their own, through just age-related illness or other confounding factors, and then all of a sudden they're preyed on by their families, people who should love and respect them, like I loved and respected my elders. And they're abusing them and manipulating them, and I think it's terrible.
You're wearing your white ribbon indicating that you're an ambassador for the prevention of domestic violence.
Yes.
And if you think about domestic violence and you think about elder abuse, typically the community and maybe the police as well, in reflecting community attitudes, would have thought, well, that's a private matter. That's not a matter for the police.
Absolutely.
That persists in the community. How hard is that to overcome?
It's something you've got to really persevere with. So when I joined the police, I joined in 1990. So it's not that long ago, but some people might think it's a long time ago.
Just the other day.
Just the other day, exactly. And the response then was very poor. So if we were called to a domestic dispute, we would turn up and basically separate the parties, tell them both to behave themselves. We'd have to come back and lock someone up and drive away. So the message to the sufferer, to the woman, in most cases, was don't upset the person, don't upset the man and cause attention. To the man was keep yourself in check and don't be so violent as to call us there. So unbelievably poor. So now I think we're very proactive, we're very engaged, we're very victim centred and very, very support focused. So I think it's really great. And that whole concept of private business I think is really outdated. And the same thing has gone for child abuse, where for many years, and again my own history, I went to a school which is Catholic Brothers School, and quite a few of the Christian brothers have been through the court process, so rightly so. Luckily I wasn't affected by that, but a lot of my schoolmates were. So again, private business, don't criticise the church if it's happening in the home. And again, you've got to get past that stranger danger thing. So with child abuse, it was always a focus on stranger danger, whereas the offender's either going to be someone in your home, it's going to be someone related to you or someone you trust as a sports provider or a teacher or whatever else. And abuse of older people is very similar in that the focus seems to swing back onto aged care residences and formal care settings and victimisation by paid carers, when really it's going to be someone's son, daughter or grandson that is going to provide them the greatest risk.
And that's complicated and messy, right?
Immensely, absolutely, because you've got an older person who's inherently proud of their sons and their daughters and their granddaughters and what they've achieved, and have raised them and tried to teach them the ways of the world and give them values to go ahead and succeed. Then all of a sudden they're stealing their home and their possessions, and they're violently assaulting them, or they're preventing them from going to church and seeing their friends, or to Rotary, and by cutting off these networks, they isolate them and then exploit them. So the barriers to preventing is terrible, and it's also this perception with policing is that once you call the police, we turn up, we kick down doors, we lock everybody up, we can cause a ruckus in this blunt, brutal manner. It's not true.
Either or.
Absolutely. We're quite nuanced now. I think our systems are really mindful of the need to be respectful of the needs and wishes of the person that calls us.
You've co-authored a paper on older person abuse presentations to emergency departments.
Yes.
Why are you focusing on the hospital setting like that?
Because it's a big missing piece of the detection puzzle. So the greatest enabler of abuse is isolation, and the greatest prevention is social inclusion. So if someone's isolated from the community, they can't complain that they're being robbed or ripped off or hurt. They can't seek help because they're being kept away from the outside world. If someone's then so unwell physically that they have a fall or they tear skin or some sort of injury happens where the abuser / carer needs to take them to a doctor, needs to present to an emergency ward, it's a crucial moment to seek help. And often it's very small and it's often missed. So hospitals will have policies and procedures for responding to child abuse, and they're very, very good at that. They're very good at looking past versions of abuse. Oh, he falls down all the time as a child, and now we know that injuries. But with older people, we're very happy to accept the version of the carer. So again, the abuser / carer, I can use it interchangeably. Well, they'll present to the emergency ward with an older person who's either very unwell or injured. And then the professional, the nurse or the doctor or the social worker will ask the younger person, the abuser or the carer, what happened to the patient or the client, and don't ask them.
Why not?
It's ageism, and it's assuming that the younger person knows what's going on, the older person doesn't. It's making assumptions that if they've got some reduced mental cognizance or communication capacity through some sort of age-related condition, they don't know what's going on. They can't be trusted to give an adequate history, so they go to the younger person who's the person in charge of their lives.
And which is exactly what we used to do with children.
What's happening?
You can't believe what he said about this older person, the coach, the priest, the brother.
Yep.
They're just a child, they're making it up.
Making it up, exactly right. So it's the same disrespect, and it's the same misuse of power. So in those situations, the priest or the teacher has the power, or the husband has the power because they're physically strong. In this case, it's the younger person who has the ability to communicate, who's upright, who can present well when they attend, and the wishes of the older person are disregarded. And it's the time they should be going to safety, and they should be really acknowledged. And if they're so unwell, they've got to get help. We need help, medical professionals to step up and to assist them.
So what has to change for that brief moment in accident and emergency, which is, the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? It's
Indeed.
The absolute acute moment.
It is.
Every other bit of prevention has failed, and it's down to the men and women in blue.
Exactly.
What has to happen for that to go right?
The respect is going to be shown to the sufferer. So the needs of the sufferer must come first, not the needs of the ward to move people through quickly. And everyone's got pressures. I'm not being disrespectful. My wife's in the healthcare profession. So if they've got to turn people over and move them through the ward, that shouldn't take primacy over the needs of the older person. If an older person has trouble communicating through either their native language, or they lack some sort of cognition, or they have some sort of injury which prevents them speaking, take the time to get the history in the absence of the other person. And it's about, again, looking at the body language. If the older person looks frightened of their son or daughter, there must be something going on. It's worth exploring. And it may just because they're confused or they're really unwell, which happens. And some of these things are explainable by infirmity, which is sad. But ask the question in the absence of the offender or the person that's brought them in. Take the time to get a proper history, and then engage in the services. And really, police in this circumstance are probably the last ones that should be involved, because it's too late. By the time we've reached the stage of an offence being committed, someone's gravely ill, and the evidence shows very clearly that when older people are abused, they die sooner. Their lifespan shortens dramatically. So we want to see those early intervention opportunities, which often is just a primary health provision issue, given primacy. People need health care first and foremost so they live and survive, and then we can pick up the pieces later.
You're the commander of the Hills Local Area Command, and it is a multicultural part of Sydney. So when you're talking to the men and women who you send out into the community to try and do this work, how much more difficult is it to try and work out what's right and what needs to happen in community when you're dealing with culturally and linguistically diverse communities who might have a different set of expectations about what happens with older people than you as an Irish Catholic have?
Well, it's about developing empathy for our customers and having understanding that everyone's needs are different. That if our expectations of what a person of the exchange of policing will be, that person A is a victim, they'll give us a version, they'll provide a statement, and go to us to court. So that's the transaction we expect. Those things don't always happen. So I try to really instill it with my people through leadership and education that need to address their issues, to still apply the law equally and fairly, but understand that there's nuances that need to be addressed, and whether that needs a third-party service provider to come in to assist us. We have a vulnerable officer at my command who specialises in what I call grey area policing, where it's a link between police and human services and health and the clients to make sure they're safe. And it's understanding the dynamics. So, as I said in the panel before about family reunions, so many Indian communities engage in a family reunion program where mum and dad live in India. The children have migrated to Australia and often doing well, educated and professional. They say, mum and dad, come and live with us. You can spend time with your children and your grandchildren, which is a very desirable and wonderful thing. So they come over. Next thing you know, they've liquidated their home in India, bring the cash, inject that into the family funds in Australia, and then before you know it, they're unpaid helpers in the house, or they're basically consigned to a back shed or a small room somewhere, which happens far too often.
So you do see that?
Absolutely, very, very common. And as soon as I talk about this in some of these groups, you have people nudging each other, and it happens a lot. And they cut off. They have no language skills, so they've not language. They may have sort of functional English at best, or no English at all. So they cut off from that. They cut off from their social groups. Where in India means India is a very big place. So there's different, from different towns and provinces and areas, faith groups. So they aren't given access to go to their temple, for example, if they're a Sikh or whatever religion they follow, which is very, very important and part of their whole makeup. So they're isolated, so they have nowhere to go and ask for help. And I've actually had a call from a fellow that found two old Indian people in a bus stop in Lane Cove and picked them up and took them home, and because they'd escaped their son who'd done that very thing. And the sons hold the visa over their heads and say, if you complain to the authorities, we'll send you back to India with no money, or we'll embarrass you, we'll put you in the paper. And I'm learning all the time, and I try and pass on that. An Indian fellow the other day said, well, in India, if there's a crime, the newspaper often publishes the full details of the thing. Mr. and Mrs. Singh from this address, this happened, they named the offender. And he said, do police do that here? I said, no, we preserve the dignity and privacy of our complainants. We don't publish their details in the paper. But that cultural paradigm was brought to Australia. Then when I explained that, he was very relieved and explained to other people. So it's a matter of having that empathy and understanding, or your client group.
And how do you sit in your office and look out the window and think, who's out there? How will I find them? If they're isolated and that's a feature of the crime, how will I find them? What will I do? Well,
I work very closely with champions of the community, so I've got some close working relationships with formal and informal community groups in the hills. I make myself very accessible. I go to opening of an envelope in the hills, for example, because it means people talk to you, and when they get to know you, they have confidence, or they'll refer a third party, or they'll advocate someone to come and talk to us because they trust us. We have domestic violence victims come to the Hills Police Station because we have a good reputation for treating victims well. So for me, that's crucial. It's that word of mouth, and I view that my Hills Command is my business, and I'm their advocate. And so I build networks. So, for example, the India Club in the Hills is a great leadership group. They provide support and functions to Indian members of the community, such as Diwali and bits and pieces. But they're now running information sessions, and they'll have the leaders speak to the community groups, and I go along and speak to them as well, and just tell them how the law works and who we are and how we will support them and what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. And often they don't know that. If they're ensconced in that total subcontinental world, and they bring their values with them, which are fine, I respect that, but they then think, well, the behaviour that's inflicted upon them is okay because it's okay where I'm from. We say, no, it's not. You're here in Australia, you're safe, this is our landscape. So by building as a personal advocate, I think I build the confidence in our brand, for want of a better description, as police. And it is a brand. People brand us very quickly. People We're always told as police not to make assumptions about people, but people always make assumptions about police. They're very comfortable broad brushing us, saying, well, the police do this, but we're very diverse. We've got 20,000 members. And I think that I was starting in my area and then our region, Northwest Region, under Mark Jones, my Assistant Commissioner, we really drive that community engagement in that respect.
And so just finally, are the seeds of a solution to this stronger laws, greater enforcement of the laws, or is it just around awareness by everybody?
I think it's awareness, and we've seen that with domestic violence and with child abuse, is that when people are open to these issues and want to talk about it and say no and prescribe it on a community basis, it has the best effect. Laws are great, and I want law reform. I think our laws aren't strong enough. We have a very good suite of legislation around child protection, which is absolutely fine, and the barriers for prosecution are very low. So, with neglect offences, for example, the opportunity to prosecute those against offenders against children is quite simple, but for older people it doesn't exist.
Do you need laws specific for elder abuse?
Look, I think I've made this point even to the Law Reform Commission. I think we've got two different views, but as a police officer, in my frame of reference, and especially, and I've got to look at my frame of reference being a constable on the truck at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. What can they act upon? If something's illegal, we can act. And these things are so nuanced, and even the financial abuse issues, which are often civil, they're unconscionable conduct, they're criminal-ish, but they're still basically civil. And when you have that grey crossover, it's very, very problematic. Where a lot of this behaviour, if it's prescribed under the criminal law, again, looking at a constable, not me, my education, whatever else, but educated to provide basic services, should be able to act with the support of the law. If you walk up to someone on the street and punch them in the face, very clearly, it's a police matter, it's a very simple assault, easily prosecutable. But if someone's neglected or treated very poorly, and this goes in domestic violence as well, where verbal abuse in the home is often just as damaging as physical assaults, but very difficult to prosecute from time to time, but there is offences. So I think the law gives you a clear statement on behalf of the community through the government that this behaviour is unacceptable. It's outside the realms of reasonable behaviour, and it's open to prosecution.
And then after that, it's to what extent then, if you draft laws that are called elder abuse laws, notwithstanding that they might actually cover the same offences that are already on the books, does that in itself start to raise awareness?
Absolutely, because it makes it real. Then you have court cases and you have people fronting the magistrates, and the power of the magistrate is not diminished. As time goes by, there's still great benefit in putting someone before a court, and our domestic violence policy is pro-arrest, in that we think it's important to have the offender, regardless of the wishes of the victim ultimately or what the end prosecution may be, to front up to court, stand in front of the magistrate and account for themselves on behalf of the community, and I think that's very, very powerful.
Lots to be done.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it.
It. Yeah.